With all the hype surrounding Battlefield 1 and all my friends getting it as well, you know I just had to buy it. Of course, to play it with my friends and also find out if it lives up to the hype. Short answer is, it's close to it. While it is a great game, it has its fair share of shortcomings that make it fall short of the perfect scores that people have been throwing at it. Barring some of the obvious problems that are more widely talked about, there are a few more that I don't think get enough attention. But before we get into any of that, let's talk about what I like about this game. Being more of a fan of single-player games as opposed to multiplayer games, I just have to mention the campaign in Battlefield 1. Now you may ask, but Murloc, Battlefield games are always all about the multiplayer. The campaigns are always the most forgettable and boring experience in the game. And I would absolutely agree with you on that. But that is not the case this time around. The game starts you off perfectly with a disclaimer that you are entering frontline combat and you are not expected to survive. And then proceeds to put you in the shoes of several soldiers who died in the war, jumping from soldier to soldier every time you die only to relive the last moments of the next soldier. And it keeps doing this a few times throughout the prologue, which sets the tone for the rest of the campaign perfectly, with the recurring theme that war is hell, nobody wins, and there's no glory to be had. A theme that you very rarely see in other war games, and which fits the World War I setting perfectly. And instead of having a single overarching story with some action hero main character, we're given these shorter sort of mini campaigns, which follows the personal, more emotional stories of several different soldiers from World War I. And when I say these campaigns are emotional, I mean it entirely. By the end of each campaign, you'll have either shed tears or made silly faces like this one. And these moments in the campaign are made even better by the amazing soundtrack this game has, and the very nearly real looking and sounding graphics that the Frostbite engine provides. And of course, while we're talking about the soundtrack, as you probably heard from the beginning of the video, the old Battlefield theme is back. Good to hear some classic Battlefield music. I didn't like in Battlefield 3 they started changing the soundtrack to be like Of course though, the core of any game is the gameplay. And while Battlefield 1 doesn't do anything new or innovative in that regard, it sticks with the formula that's worked well for it for several years. So if you've played any Battlefield games in the past several years, you'll probably be pretty comfortable jumping right into this one. Just like previous iterations, it's engaging, well animated, and it really feels like you're in control of your character completely. But that's all stuff that's been in previous Battlefield games, so instead of talking too much about that, I'm going to talk about what's new in Battlefield 1. First up being little tweaks to the melee system. For one, you can now also pick your melee weapon as well as everything else. It only seems to have a cosmetic effect though, which I think is a little unfortunate. And as before, if you get the jump on someone from either behind or from the side, you'll get a sweet little animated kill move. But now when you're attacking someone from the front, you'll get sort of a locking on feature, where your aim will sort of be directed at the player as long as they're in range. And then you also have the bayonet charge, which charges you forward at an enemy, and it'll kill them in one hit if you make contact with them, but doesn't have the same locking on mechanic, so it's harder to hit someone with a bayonet charge. Also returning from previous games is the destructible environments. It makes a return in Battlefield 1 in a great way. If you haven't played a Battlefield game since before Bad Company, basically any explosive weapon can have this effect on buildings or even just the ground. You can blow out chunks of buildings and even leave craters on the ground that infantry can hide in. And they've done a great job in Battlefield 1 of making that look even more realistic than before. And now, unlike previous games, chopping down a door isn't the only way to get through it. Doors are now finally interactable and can be opened and closed, which doesn't sound that great, but considering it's been missing from every previous Battlefield game, I feel like it's a highly welcome addition to Battlefield 1. And if opening the doors quietly isn't your style, you can also just bash through them by sprinting at them, which is a nice touch, and it feels like it was the last piece of the puzzle needed to make a fully fledged parkour mechanic for the game. And now you have these sort of power vehicles which are given to the losing team during the bigger game modes such as Operations or Conquest. And they're delivered in a fair way that while they're powerful, they're not overpowered and they can be countered by a skilled player. And meanwhile, a squad of skilled players manning these power vehicles can turn the tide of a losing battle. And it also proves that if it was before, it's no longer a technical limitation to have these huge vehicles in the game. It brings hope that future titles could have battleships and aircraft carriers like Battlefield 1942, or Titans like 2142. I personally love to see a remake of 2142 with this current engine, and Titan mode even making a return. And now disabling vehicles is a little more in depth than before. Now if you do enough damage to one particular part of a vehicle, you'll disable that specific part. So you can leave a tank mobile but without a weapon, or vice versa, or tear up the wings of an airplane and make it harder for the pilot to maintain control, which is a huge improvement over the previous system where a vehicle was either completely disabled or not at all. And now on certain multiplayer maps you'll have these dynamic weather effects like sandstorms rolling in out of nowhere, drastically obscuring your vision, and it makes hectic moments even more hectic. Not to mention making each map feel more real. Like anything can happen at any given moment. And they've added these sweet little entering animations for all the vehicles, which isn't much, but it's a nice touch since it doesn't feel like you're teleporting into a vehicle anymore. Unfortunately though, you still teleport when you're exiting a vehicle, which can be a little disorienting if you're not used to it. And there's also this new game mode called Operations. These are sort of multiplayer mini campaigns based off of real battles from World War I, and they all start you off with a little narrative at the beginning to sort of introduce you to the battle. And the way the game mode actually works is kind of like a mix between Conquest and Rush. Similarly to Rush, as a defender you have two objectives that you have to stop the attackers from capturing, and as an attacker you have two objectives that you have to take from the defenders. Once both objectives are captured, you move on to the next stage of the battle. You win if you clear all sectors, and you lose if you run out of lives. Similarly to Conquest though, these objectives are actually little bases you have to capture. If you capture one, you have to defend that one and attack the other, because the defenders can recapture their objectives. If the attackers win, they get to move on to the next map. If they lose, they get to retry up to 2 times with a heavy vehicle such as a Zeppelin reinforcing them. If the defenders manage to push back all 3 of their attempts, they win. And if the attackers manage to clear out all the maps, they win. The game mode can feel a little linear sometimes, but it's still a lot of fun to play and it serves as the go-to game mode for most players. And lastly, this one came as a surprise to me, but there are these battle packs in the game that you buy and open, and they give you random cosmetic skins for weapons. Now when you first hear about something like that, it sounds like some kind of shitty microtransaction system, but the currency to buy these battle packs is unlocked exclusively through gameplay, so I gotta say hats off to EA for not having microtransactions in the game. Unfortunately though, this sentiment's kinda sullied by their DLC plans, which is actually the first thing I want to talk about that I disliked about the game. There's often times where it feels like there's a lot missing from Battlefield 1. Entire countries and entire fronts of the war that are left without even a mention. France being just one example that is confirmed to be a DLC in the future. These DLC plans are probably also why the campaign is so short. Each little mini campaign is suspiciously DLC length. It gives off the impression that they intentionally made it short so that they can complete it by adding DLC campaigns. And probably my biggest pet peeve about game development is when content is removed from the main game to be sold again as DLC. So how much can you expect to pay for the game if you want all the content? $130 fucking dollars? It's absolutely disgusting to me, to be sure, but honestly I kind of expected it from EA. And oh yeah, I kind of mentioned it in that little rant before, but the campaign is ridiculously short, taking the average player only about 5 hours to complete the whole thing, even on the hard difficulty. And in the campaign they put you through this tutorial for a super simple flying system, similar to the controls for flying in Battlefront, where a lot of controls are just sort of put on automatic and you're kind of more telling the plane where to go. But then when you try to fly a plane in an actual multiplayer game, you'll find that the controls are entirely different. Honestly, I like the multiplayer controls better because you're put in control of your plane more, but it's such a steep learning curve to fly a plane in multiplayer because you're given no tutorial. No, worse than that, you are given a tutorial that teaches you the wrong things. It guarantees that the first several times you fly a plane in multiplayer, you're going to crash within seconds. Now you've probably heard this a lot about the game already, but there are a ton of fully automatic experimental weapons that are entirely overrepresented. Now it's all stuff that technically did exist back then, but either wasn't used in the war or wasn't used until much later in the war. Hell, forget all the SMGs in the game, and the semi-automatic shotguns. Semi-automatic rifles were not used in World War I. They existed, and they were tested, but all governments pretty much unanimously decided not to issue them to their soldiers because they thought they were unreliable. Now, I'm not saying these weapons don't have any place in Battlefield 1, but I'll talk about where I think they belong later. What I do think has no place in Battlefield 1 is these hero classes. This is a returning feature from Battlefront, and honestly, I thought it worked well for Battlefront. This is not Battlefront. Battlefield is different from Battlefront, and it needs to be treated differently than Battlefront. It feels borderline insulting to the people who died in World War I having these Rambo-style action hero classes. Especially with the tone of the rest of the game, these hero classes feel incredibly out of place. And also, similarly to Battlefront, you have to spawn in most of the vehicles. Now thankfully they don't work like power-ups anymore, but now when you spawn in them, you're stuck with this pilot or tanker class instead of the class you've actually selected. Which sucks because that means if you have to bail out, you can't level up the class you want to level up until you die. And then it's made even worse by the fact that there are unlocks for getting rank 10 with a certain class that are usable by any other class once it's unlocked. Which means, for example, if you want to use this super cool revolver on a scout class, fuck it, you have to play assault for 10 fucking levels. And trust me, 10 levels in a class is a long time. If there's any weapon that is usable by multiple classes, it should be a total level unlock, so that when you reach a certain level with your character, not a certain class, you will unlock that weapon. Especially in a game like Battlefield, where switching to a different class could turn the tide of a battle. Next, while I absolutely love the way lean is supposed to work, it's really unresponsive and cancels at the most inconvenient times. Or when you think you're looking at a wall just right to trigger a lean, the game disagrees with you. Sometimes even immediately after the lean cancels itself, you can go right back into it from the same place. I feel like at least for PC, they should have added some kind of manual lean left, lean right controls. Because while it's easy to use when it works, it rarely ever does. And that was just one of many bugs I've found while playing the game, all ranging from mildly nauseating to keyboard throwing infuriating. That fucking glitch, my character's just like, I can't shoot! Oh no, what am I gonna do? And not to mention, some maps are just absolutely broken in terms of team balance, with these bunkers that count as part of the point you have to capture, but if the defending team just puts most of their team members in that bunker, it is impossible for the attacking team to get them out of it. And that's not the only imbalance in the game. With the weapons, it just doesn't really seem like they even tested the balance for some of them. Particularly, shotguns and sniper rifles are way more powerful than the rest of the guns. And I can tell you exactly what's wrong with sniper rifles, and that's that they have this new optimal range system, where if you're using it from a specific range, you'll do extra damage, making it so you're able to one-hit people with body shots. Whereas before in Battlefield games, the only way to one-shot someone while you're sniping is to get a headshot. But now, because you can one-shot people in the body while sniping, everyone and their mother is playing the sniper class now, instead of filling the necessary support or assault roles. And while I have this lovely piece of footage up in the first place, I need to mention that now you can only purchase or customize your classes in a game, meaning that if you want to take your time to decide what you want to spend your war bonds on, or to customize your class and decide what weapon you want to use, you can't do that in the main menu, so you have to go into a match to be able to customize your class. Why anyone would think this is a good idea is, it's just, I don't even have words. It seems beyond stupid to just not allow you to do that at the main menu. There's just no reason for it. I mean, what? Is customization from the main menu gonna be DLC or some shit? But I need to calm down because my last complaint isn't nearly as bad as that. To the untrained eye, this might just look like a big gray screen with a HUD slapped on it. But the untrained eye would be wrong, because that is what it's like to stand in a smoke grenade in Battlefield 1. The main purpose of a smoke grenade is to provide visual cover from your enemies, but it seems like DICE wanted to add a blinding component as well this time around. And I have no problem with that, but the fact that it obscures your vision entirely is what I have a problem with. I feel like they should have made it so you can at least see a foot in front of your character. I wish you could see like 1 foot in front of you when someone throws a smoke grenade. I can't fucking get out of here. There we go. Like 1 foot is all I need just to be able to see what the fuck my face is pressed up against. And so with all these complaints, we come to the question I ask myself every review: what would I have done differently if I was in charge? So of course, with all the praise I gave the campaign, let's talk about that first. Of course, the main problem is that it's short and it just needs to be longer, but there's two root causes that are making it short that I want to talk about. When you're going through the first two campaigns, you'll notice that they're roughly 5 missions long. But then the campaigns after that take a dive and there's only 2 or 3 missions in each one. So, simple solution, just make them 5 missions long. In fact, one of the campaigns that's only 2 missions long is all about this Italian soldier trying to find his brother, or something like that, who was sent on a mission where they had to get separated. In fact, now that I think about it, I'm not even sure it was his brother. Which is exactly my point. You have no reason to care for this person you're looking for. And that 2 mission campaign could have greatly benefited from 3 more missions building up a background for this character. So if all the campaigns had done that and made them 5 missions long, they could have probably added like 3 hours to the campaign, making it probably a decent length. But what's definitely the biggest problem with the campaign is its total lack of representation of the Central Powers. This wasn't World War II, the other side weren't the bad guys, quote unquote. Every country on both sides were just unfortunate victims of these alliances they'd all made in secret. Hell, it's downright insulting to be portraying the Central Powers in such a bad light as they are in this game. Showing some stories from the perspective of the Central Powers not only would have gone a long way towards dispelling this image they've painted of them, but could have also doubled the length of the campaign. They could have had an award-winning campaign if they'd done something like this. You know what the truly insulting part about this is that this is probably going to be a DLC, mark my words. Campaigns for the Central Powers are going to be a paid DLC later on in this game's lifecycle. The next change I would make is in regard to the operations game mode. Its biggest shortcoming is how linear it is and how biased it is towards the defenders. Now, I don't mind this defender bias too much, but because it's so linear as well, that means that the later maps are usually never experienced. So I probably would have sacrificed just a little bit of historical accuracy just to randomize the maps a little bit. That way you don't have to push all the way forward as attackers to be able to experience all the maps in this game mode. And while we're randomizing stuff, it'd probably also help to have a button to join a random operation. Because as it stands, if you want to play on the operations game mode, you have to decide on a map. But sometimes I just want to do an operation and I don't care which one. And while we're talking about game modes, it seems like every time they make a new Battlefield game, they add a new game mode to it, and then throw it away for the next game. The core game is missing these game modes from previous games like air superiority and obliteration, etc. Sad thing is though, unfortunately, we're probably going to see these game modes but as a paid DLC, cause that's EA for you. And lastly, there's a whole slew of things I'd change with weapon distribution and balance. First of all, the aforementioned sweet spot for sniper rifles. Since the technology already exists in the game, I would not get rid of it as much as I hate the system. Because I think it could actually work out as a good thing if the distance were just changed to a close range instead of a long range. Because the advantage to sniper rifles is that they already have that distance that other weapons don't. So they don't need that advantage strengthened with a damage bonus. But if they had that damage bonus applied in close quarters so that you could get a one-shot body shot when you're up close, that would make bolt-action rifles more of a viable choice in any situation. Which makes sense for a World War I game. It would also not make shotguns obsolete because it's actually pretty hard to hit someone that close up in the first try. And you'll probably take a couple shots just to hit them. But then doing that with the current system for weapons in the game would make snipers even more popular than they are now, and they're way too popular as it is. But I see a way to fix this problem and another one that people probably didn't notice. See, in previous Battlefield games, there was a list of weapons that were usable by any class, PDWs and the like. But in Battlefield 1, cross-class weapons seem to have all but disappeared. Meaning that if you don't like the type of weapon a certain class uses, you're likely never going to play it, even if it's an essential role on your team. So the solution would be to add these cross-class weapons back and make them mostly the unscoped bolt-action rifles, leaving the scoped versions for the sniper class. If you combine this with the ability to get one-shot body shots in close range with the bolt-action rifles, you'll have not only a fairly versatile choice for any class to use, but you'd also see more people using bolt-action rifles, and it'd feel a lot more like World War I, where those types of weapons were the standard issue for most soldiers on the field. And as far as the issue about these overrepresented automatic experimental weapons and whatnot, it's an easy fix for the campaign to just take some of them out. But it's not so simple for multiplayer since some of the classes are built around these weapons. But how I would have done it is, for one, leave the heavy machine guns in the hands of the support class, but maybe make them a bit more unwieldy. It seems a little easy to just run and gun with these heavy machine guns in your hands, when they were more meant to be fired from a stable position. So maybe make them less accurate, but give them a bipod so they're meant to be fired from prone or from cover or something like that. That would solve heavy machine guns, but next up would be submachine guns and semi-automatic rifles. I would probably make the semi-automatic rifles something usable by every class, but only unlocked at a really high level. And then take the SMGs away from assault, because they already have plenty of goddamn shotguns. Take the improvised machine pistols and carbines away from the tanker and pilot classes, and give both those and the submachine guns to the medic class, with the submachine guns being a higher level unlock. So with all these changes, I feel like it'd go a long way towards making this feel more like a World War I game, with less experimental automatic weapons and semi-automatic weapons and whatnot. And so we come to the final verdict of the game, which is probably a 7 out of 10. But a high 7 though, because it is a cut above what I would normally rate a 7, but not good enough to be an 8. And I don't do partial scores here, and if I had to choose between a 7 or an 8, I would have given it a 7, so I did. The whole formula for the game, story and gameplay, feels like this should have been a World War II game instead of a World War I game. If they had just made it a World War II game, it probably could have bumped it up to an 8. But all the other issues I found with the game wouldn't have made it go much higher than that. It will justify its price at $60, but it will not justify the price for all the DLC with a $50 season pass and a $130 Ultimate Edition. Point is, if you're thinking about getting this game, I would highly encourage you to do so, because it's a great game, but don't spend more than $60 on it. Just wait. If the DLC really does turn out to be worth $50, then you can still get it then. But for what they normally do with their DLC packs, it doesn't seem like it'll be worth another full price tag. Asking us to spend that much money just on the hope that it'll be good is insulting, but that's just what EA is like, so I mean, I've kind of come to expect it. I hope we see the same level of improvement from this to Battlefront 2, which we've heard is confirmed in the making, as we've clearly gotten from Battlefront to this. Till then though, I'll see you guys in the next video. Wait, what? This shit has a fucking fully automatic firing mode? What fucking shotguns? Son of a bitch!